In this last clip, we will look at the best defense for black when he plays c7 to c5. But I'm pretty sure that I have something for you in my sleeve, that I have new interesting ideas that will show you that white can fight for an advantage. So this bishop f4, the London system against the d5 move, the Queen's Gambit, is not at all an easy equalizer for black. Let's start. Here we have d4, and after d5 we play the new move bishop f4. Now we will look at the idea c5, and we will start looking at immediately c5. Then we just play e3. And if at one point black plays knight f6, then we are back to the best defense. Here, queen b6 instead, I don't think is a good move, because we can play knight c3, and he can't even capture on b2. If he does, then immediately he's lost after knight captures d5. I use Fritz to analyze, and you are welcome to check this out with your chess program. Instead of capture on b2 in this position, then he should try e6, or he of course have to defend the pawn on d5 either with e6 or knight f6. First we look at e6. Then we play knight b5, and this is the new idea I have for you. And after knight a6, this knight is very well placed on b5. It's a strong knight there, and it's very difficult to attack it and to get rid of it. Because if he attacks the knight with the bishop and plays c4, we don't have to take care of the knight on b5. Actually, here Fritz surprised me by suggesting the move c3, but the more I looked at it, the stronger it became. If now black just develop his knight to f6, then b3 gives white a clear advantage. And if black goes for the pawn, winning the pawn, then again Fritz surprised me with knight d2, but the idea is of course simple. After knight f6, then b3 is giving white a clear advantage. And to capture on b2 instead, in this position, instead of knight f6, gives white a one position because of queen a4 check, and then after king d8 and rook b1, there is no defense. Rook captures b7 will win the game. Of course, black can try to exchange the queens, but after rook captures b7, it's still a one position for white. You can go and check this out. You are welcome. I'm talking from my experiences with Fritz. Then we look at knight f6 here, but after knight b5, black is in trouble. After knight a6, we just develop, and if he attacks our knight, then we play a4. We don't have to fear c4. In this position, we don't need to play c3. We can just play bishop e2. If he captured twice on b5, then we just castle short, and after b3, the computer again, chess program Fritz, claim winning position for white. Now, isn't that some good ideas for you to get here? Now, you see, after c5 and e3, we now know that queen b6 is not a good move. And if he was to play knight f6 at any point black, then we would have this position, and it's in this position that I suggest knight c3 as a new move, and not c3, because I think c3 is a bit tame in this position. But the funny thing is that after e3 here and black plays knight c6, with knight c6 in, then I don't think that c3 is tame. Not at all. And I'll show you why. Even though I do think that knight c3 might be a better move, because we are developing a piece, and then we are at the same time threatening knight b5. So just keep that in mind. But now I'm going to show you why c3 is not a bad move at all. Of course, he can just develop here with knight f6, and then we play knight d2. And one of the ideas here is that after queen b6, we can answer it with a queen b3 move. And now we start to see the point behind, you know, knight f3, that we did not play knight f3 earlier on. If now c4, then we move back with the queen to c2, and then the point is that he do not have bishop f5 here, because we did not play knight f3, so that after queen captures b2, the white knight is not on the square b1, but it is already on d2, so that we can just move back with the queen on b1. Maybe I should explain it a bit better. After d4, d5, we have the same position, but now we move, you know, the knight out. And after c5 and e3, knight c6, c3, queen b6, queen b3, c4, queen c2. You see, it's another story here, because after bishop f5, the queen can't capture on f5 because of queen captures b2. That's the reason, that's the difference. So now we are back in this position with knight f6, knight d2, queen b6, queen b3, and after c4, queen c2. It's not possible to play bishop f5, so black will have to play g6 instead. And here it's important not to allow bishop f5, but to play immediately e4. But the point is that after knight captures e4 and bishop captures c4, then again the program claims a small advantage for white. It's very important that we are able to play e4. If the black knight was on f6, we would not be able to play e4. I mean, if the black knight was not on c6, that was what I meant, then we would not be able to play e4. So that was, in this position, you saw that c4, then we move back with our queen to c2, and we have a fast e4 with a small push. And if he, instead of c4, play, for example, his bishop out to f5, now threatening c4, then we have time to capture on c5. And when he capture our queen on b3, it's forced, because he can't capture on c5 now. Then you can see we can capture on b7. So he has to capture, and then we get a strong pawn structure on the queen side. Now he must attack our bishop to get his pawn back, but by attacking his pawn on e5 and later the bishop on c5, we get a strong game. Here I once faced f6 in India. I got the better game after capture on c6, playing knight d4. I later had a small advantage. But also I want to mention, instead of bishop capture c6, to play castle short. And if a6, then white has a strong maneuver with knight h4 and e4. And it seems to me that he will get the better game after an exchange on c6 and then to play knight f5. Because he will get this knight e7 check in, and exchange on c6 will give him the better pawn structure, the better endgame. Small advantage. Another idea for black is, in this position, not to play f6 as we just saw, but king e7. Again, I suggest castle short, followed with knight h4 and e4. And I believe that white is again having the better game. You know, the computer, again, chess program, say small advantage for white here. The bishop is better than the knight in this position, and white has options to go to c5 with his knight attacking the pawn on b7. Looks very nice, looks very comfortable. If black at one point after c5 e3 capture on d5, then we will have this exchange variation in the Caro-Kann. I just moved back here in move number 1 just to show you what I'm talking about, the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann, starting like here. But it's quite interesting that in this position here, then queen c7 is quite popular to prevent bishop f4, and that gives me the idea to mention the move bishop f4 for you, because now that you know that you don't have to be afraid of queen b6 because of knight c3 with the idea to play knight b5, then bishop f4 is at least as strong as bishop d3, and then you are preventing later queen c7. Good idea. And then we come back again to this system after c5 and e3, knight c6. I told you that knight c3 is interesting here, but with knight c6 then also c3 is interesting. We looked at knight f6, and after knight d2 we looked at queen b6 and queen b3, and we saw that bishop f5 can be answered with d captures c5, and we also saw that c4 can be answered with queen c2, but we have to be fast with e4 here, getting this small pull. So then there was one thing more I would like to show you. Yes, if queen b6 here instead of knight f6, we play queen b3, and if then c4, then don't capture on b6, because to capture on b6 doesn't give us any advantage. This type position, we know it from the introduction of this DVD. This type position is normally better for black or with opposite colors. If you have the same pawn structure with white, it's better for you because you have space. And here, you know, after gaining a tempo, then queen captures b6 is an inaccuracy. No, we go back to c2, and then the idea is that if we play knight f6, we have time to knight d2, and we do not allow bishop f5, because g6 can be answered with e4. And knight d2, then bishop f5 is not possible because of queen captures f5. Then some of you ask, yes, Mr. Danielsen, but after queen c2, then immediately black could play bishop f5. Yes, but now we come again to new ideas, new variations, and that's the good thing about this DVD. We capture on f5. To play queen c7 is too passive, and we do not get any advantage, and that's not why we play white, is it? So we have to capture on f5, and after queen captures b2, we can capture on d5. Now this queen c1 check doesn't give black anything. You can check this out. The king can safely move to f3. And then after queen captures a1, start the same maneuver as if he was to capture on a1 first. On queen captures a1, we play queen b5, and after castle short to protect the pawn on b7, the computer program again say small advantage for white after bishop captures c4. This is really a strong position for white. I would take it anywhere, anyhow, anytime. So then after queen b5, black can also play a6, and after queen captures b7, play knight d8. I have seen mentioned queen captures a8, but analyzing it with the computer, then the computer say it's better to play queen e4. So why is it better to play queen e4? The idea is that after knight f6, we move back the queen to c2, and black has problems with his queen on a1. It's still pinned. And you see the square b8 is not available for the rook because of our bishop f4. Then Then on queen e4, knight f6, bishop, queen c2 is better for white. Go and check it up. Welcome. And if he instead, after queen e4, capture on a2, then we can capture on c4, attacking the queen, and after queen captures on c4, then we capture the rook on a8, and suddenly the computer say winning position for white. Now that is also a good analysis in my opinion. So that's the reason why after knight c6, c3 is not a tame move, because of the variations you just saw. Then it's time to move on with the best defense for black. And then we, after bishop f4, come to knight f6. And then, you know, e3 and c5. After c5, then I think c3 is tame because of queen b6. And then after queen b3, he can play c4. You know that queen captures b6 is an inaccuracy, that it gives black a simple game. And that means we have to move back with our queen to c2. And then black will play g6 to prevent, no, sorry, to be able to play bishop to f5. He can't play bishop f5 immediately because of the checkmate on c8. But after queen c2 and g6, white do not have time for e4. That's the point. So he needs to develop his knight first, but after bishop f5, of course, black would never play knight c6 as in the position we just saw, because then white is a bit better after e4. But he will play bishop f5, forcing the queen to c1, and then after knight c6. Of course, white has a playable game. Later he could start to play with the move b2, b3. But that's the only thing he can get. He can get an interesting game, but he cannot get any advantage. This position is not to white's advantage in my best, not to my best knowledge. So instead, because we are here with the white pieces, we are here to try to get an advantage, and we have to look for active possibilities. So after c5, I suggest the move knight c3. Even though black has not played queen b6, then I suggest knight c3. And then I just want to mention that after c5, e3 and knight c6, you now know that c3 is not tame here. But I also have this in my backhand to suggest you knight c3 with the idea to play knight b5. Just remember it. Then we come back to knight f6, and after e3 and c5, I suggest you not to play c3, but to play knight c3. And we know that queen b6 is a bad move here. It is an inaccuracy. Today maybe I would call it a mistake, because white can play knight b5 and black will never be able to play a6, because we are forcing the knight to a6, and then he can't play a6, and after knight f3 white is better. So after knight c3, what should black do? Should he just develop his knight? No, he should not, because after knight b5 he's lost. So easy it is to win if black makes the most natural move on the board. Then he's lost, because there's no defense against knight c7 check. So that tells us that he must play either here a6, but then we can capture on c5, and that also gives us the better game. If he, black, wants to capture back the pawn, then we can play knight a4, and here black has to capture the pawn on c5, and then we will get an interesting game, because we have got the bishop pair, and the computer program again say small advantage for white. So I think this is not completely equal. I think white has some chances here to get something going. And that leaves us with less choice. We know that knight c6 is a mistake. We know that a6 can be answered with d capture c5, giving white an interesting game. We know that queen b6 is not good because of knight b5. So then, of course, black will try c captures d4. Now I will only play e captures d4. I think queen captures d4 instead only gives an equal game. Okay, it's playable, but then you will have to give up your bishop to keep the queen on d4. But after bishop e7 here, black is totally safe and should be equal. So we capture with e captures d4, and actually I played my first game in India with this move, and I won my first game, and I think it's quite strong. Again, knight c6 is losing immediately because of knight b5, and a move like bishop g4. Then, of course, we play f3, attacking the bishop, and when the bishop has to move, then we play knight b5, forcing the knight to a6, and white is better. So obviously, after e captures d4, the only move here, because we don't like queen b6, then again, we have knight b5. So he must prevent the knight to move to b5, and then we gain a tempo. And after knight c6, we are up in the center with knight e5 with a small advantage. You can go and check this out with your PC with the last position here. There are no games played so far. I couldn't find any games. But I'm going to play this as white. I hope you too. I hope you got a lot of new ideas that have inspired you, that have given you the idea, the lust to play this opening yourself. If so, then I achieved my task. Goodbye for now. So this small clip is also to show you that this is just not an easy equalizer to play the Grünfeld center up against the London. So we have d5, bishop f4, and knight f6, and after e3, g6. And of course, I mean, imagine you are playing a Grünfeld player, and he's going into his Grünfeld system with g6, and you play bishop f4. Then I actually think that it's not black's best option to go into this Grünfeld Indian at one point playing d5. I think it would be better to go into the King's Indian. But that's a different story. But I just want to give you ideas here. So after d5, bishop f4, and we are back in the Grünfeld Indian, then we develop the bishop to e2. And if black castles short, then we do the same. And after c5, c3, knight c6, knight b to d2. We looked earlier at when black capture on d4. Now we will look at some other options. But I think also black has to be careful with his pawn on c5. Otherwise, at one point, white can just capture it. So b6 makes sense, probably one of the strongest. But and then we have to take care about the maneuver knight to h5. So that's the reason why h3 makes sense. And after bishop b7, we put the knight on e5. He, of course, can get rid of our knight on e5, but with the safe center, you know, c3, d4, and e3, then we should start to play on the queen side with a4, a5, or b4. And if you check it up, you have still a small advantage with white. You just have a game, small advantage, and possible to play on. There's no reason just to give a draw here. Knight b to d2, queen b6, and then after queen b3, black plays c4. This is probably one of the best defenses for black when you play the Grünfeld Indian, because this type position here we know with opposite colors is good for white. But here white is well developed. And that makes a difference because he can play knight e5 and he's already into the center, and later he wants to play e4. He's actually maybe threatening e4 here immediately with a good game. And you see, if black plays bishop f5, it is possible to hit the bishop, and the bishop will have to move back, and then we just secure gaining space. secure the g4 pawn with h3. This is probably one of the better defenses, but black can hope for no more than equal game here because he is behind in time. Then knight d7 is a possibility, but here is a strong move I want to suggest to you, and that's queen to b3, hitting the pawn on d5. Of course, black's idea with knight d7 is to play e5, but you see after queen b3 it's not so easy to play e5, because if he does, then we can play bishop g5, and f6 is answered with queen captures d5, check, winning a pawn. So that's not the move for black. So he must play c4, and then after queen b5 we are still attacking the queen on d8 with the bishop g5, and we are also attacking the d5 pawn with our queen on b5. So of course the queen on d8 has only a5 square to its disposal, getting rid of this threat and then defending the d5 pawn indirectly. We capture on a5 and then we play e4 with the better game. It's difficult to see what this c4 pawn is good for black. So this was queen b3, and of course also here if you play c4 black instead of playing e5, then we can play queen b5, and if now knight f6, then we do not have e4, but we can go for b3 with the better game. Then we just need to have an idea how to react on knight h5, and this is actually what this strong international master Steffen Petersen, he played against me. I didn't play bishop g5. It's possible to play bishop g5. I captured on c5, and after knight captures back on f4 and d4, I got the better game after knight c4. He was lucky later to escape with a draw. I don't think he will repeat this again, but this is a small advantage for white, and black is still fighting to get his pawn back. White is better developed. So bishop g5 is another option, and if black goes for the bishop, then we don't allow him to get the bishop without weakening anything. So we play knight e1, and to capture the bishop here would weaken his pawn structure. So and we would of course get the knight with everything safe and healthy. So he would have to go back with his knight probably, and after bishop g3 and knight d7 to defend the pawn on c5, we could start to attack the d5 pawn, but this time with the bishop. And if he capture on d4, we could capture with the e pawn, but also c captures d4, giving a kind of sclav position with symmetrical position, but white has the much better game after knight d3. The computer say clear advantage. Black has weakened his pawn structure on the king side, and white is much better developed. Clear advantage. So you see, I hope you see that the Grünfeld setup against the London system is not the best defense.